Hey everybody, this is Bob Griffin. I'm the Dean of the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity. Welcome back. This is a continuation of the town meeting that we held last week in conjunction with the School of Public Health. A couple of things that are a little bit different that we're doing this week than we did last week is in the Q&A portion of your screen, you can upvote questions. So we weren't able to get through all of the questions last week, and we realized that some were more pressing than others. So this gives you an opportunity to participate with us as we pick the questions that move forward. A couple of quick comments before I introduce the panelists. I just want to remind folks that we are indeed living in historical times, and what is occurring around us will shape our communities, our society, and absolutely your future. Please keep peace with yourself. Practice self-control and good habits, and perform random acts of kindness if you can. In a time of stress, sometimes it has a tendency to bring out the worst in people, and that's when we need you to be your best. Remember always that we hate the virus, but we love the people and support the people who are affected by it. Tonight, we're fortunate to be joined with our provost, Dr. Carol Kim, who will be followed by the Dean of the School of Public Health, Dr. David Holtgrave, who will be followed by the Vice Dean of the School of Public Health, Dr. Mary Gallant, who will be followed by Dr. Brian Nussbaum of CEHC, and then we're going to get into questions and answers. So in order to try to reserve as much time as possible for your Q&A, I'd like to turn it over to Provost Kim to say a few words.
Okay, thank you, Dean Griffin. I really appreciate that. And first, I'd just like to share my appreciation to all the faculty and students for being so resilient and supportive during this global health crisis. And you've all done such an amazing job migrating from the remote learning, from the face-to-face classroom learning to the remote teaching and learning. And I know that was a major undertaking for all involved, and so want to really thank everyone for that. Overall, both students and faculty seem to be getting through the transition fairly well, but if there are problems, if there are hiccups for either the faculty or students, we'd like to hear from you as soon as possible so that we can help you and support you. There were a few reports of students and faculty having issues with Zoom or Blackboard, but only a small number of those problems have been reported, so please let us know. On March 19th, we launched a technical difficulty survey to students to assess their hardware and software needs. And we had 687 respondents, and we found that more than 100 students needed hardware or software of some type. Although again, if you hear of any students or know of students who need hardware or software, please let us know. We're using repurposed library computers and WCI computers to loan to students in need, and coordinating with the Dean of Students to get the computers to the students. So if you are experiencing a need in the hardware or software, please let our Dean of Students know. We're also distributing laptops that we just received from SUNY System. So we're trying to get these resources out to students. Remote advising is working well, with each advisor meeting advisees via Zoom by appointment, as well as handling walk-ins through the Zoom platform. We're creating a faculty and student hotline. So with email and phone, dedicated to responding to faculty or students with any kind of concerns. So please make that resource available to yourself, and we'll get that information out to the community as soon as possible. We really want to provide as much faculty and much of the faculty, students, and staff with flexibility as we move forward. So on the student side, we've extended the SU and W deadline to May 1st. For the faculty and staff, we are, for the tenure track faculty, we are allowing the tenure clock to extend so that this semester does not count toward promotion and tenure. And also, we have the SURF scores that are not going to be counted for this semester. This is an opt-in if the faculty wish to use the SURF scores from this semester. We've also done some creative problem solving with our, for example, with our MSW students. You know, these students can't complete their field placements, or many of them can't, and are being deployed in advising to provide wraparound services for our students, including the international students who have been recalled to UAlbany. And so this ensures continuity and support of the students, but it also helps out our graduate students to complete their degrees, complete their field placements. Although the COVID-19 situation has been all-consuming at the moment, we are also moving forward with our enrollment and recruitment efforts for the coming year. This is very important for the future of the university. So just in closing, I'd like to again thank you very much for your flexibility and tenacity, especially during this very challenging time. Thank you.
Also, remember, you can load questions into the Q&A section while you're listening to the speakers. Dean Holtgrave, would you like to give us an update?
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. And it's great to be with you and the provost and all the faculty, students, and staff of CEHC, SPH, and other guests that are joining us here this evening. We really appreciate everyone coming together. And I think last week's town hall was a real sense of family. So we appreciate the chance to have another conversation like that this week. So I'm glad we're doing this. I'll give just a quick EPI update and talk just a little bit about what has changed in the pandemic since we were together last week. I'll just take 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Now globally, we're at about 750,000 cases of this novel coronavirus, about 36,000 deaths so far in the US, about 153,000 cases. And here in New York, we're at about 66,500 cases overall, and that's out of about 186,000 tests. So that means about 35% of people who are tested in New York State are testing positive. New York City, sort of even more so. In New York City, about 36, just in the last day, I should say, in New York City, 3,685 cases in the last 24 hours out of about 6,200 tests. So that means about 59% of people who were tested in the last day in New York City were testing positive for COVID-19. In Albany, a little bit different, about 217 cases so far out of about 3,500 tests, so about 6.2% positivity here. So a little bit of a different story in the capital region compared to New York City. And I raised those positivity rates just because, especially in New York City at 59% positivity, it means we still need to have more testing that's available out there. At 59% positivity, testing is really being done as a diagnostic tool as opposed to really getting a sense of how many people are living with this novel coronavirus in the whole area around New York City. So that's an important challenge for us. There's a lot of mathematical models out there, many of them, and one that I'll just mention is the IHME model out of University of Washington. I only mentioned that one because the White House seems to be very focused on that particular model, and Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci use it a lot when they talk about where we're at. And that particular model predicts that the number of deaths should peak in the US sort of 2 to 3 weeks from now at about, and over the next 90 days, a total of about 81,000 deaths. That's assuming that all of the social distancing, testing, everything that's in place now continues. And that's one of the more optimistic models. So 81,000 deaths is very much on the optimistic end of total number of deaths expected. And at the peak we would be at about 2,200 deaths per day in the United States. So even at the optimistic end of these models, we still have quite a bit to go through as a nation. Also, just to say, unfolding since last week, there's been a number of points of progress around the availability of testing. There's now new test that you can do yourself. It's not a home test, but you can do in the presence of a healthcare provider, do the nasal swab yourself, put it in a test tube, give it to the healthcare provider. And that's great because it saves the personal protective equipment of that healthcare provider. And that's an important shortage point right now. So the more we can save that PPE, the better off we are. Also, Abbott Labs has come up with a rapid test that give a result in 5 minutes. They've gotten FDA approval, and they think they can be producing 50,000 tests a day by the end of this week. So hopefully we'll have a rapid test on the horizon by next week as well, too, which would be great. As you all know, the governor has put in place PAUSE, the program that sort of puts in place social distancing or physical distancing for the state for another couple of weeks, and President Trump has extended to the end of April his recommendations for sort of these 15 points that everyone in the U.S. should be taking. So in both cases, the state and federal level have continued that. Just to say a couple of things that we're doing in partnership with the Department of Health, and I would also emphasize that we're doing a lot with a number of counties of Department of Health around the region as well, too. With the State Department of Health, Eli Rosenberg, Janine Drukowski, Tomoko Udo, myself, a number of other staff and students, as well as others, have been partnering and working on a couple of things, one of which is a very quick study of looking at hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, and azithromycin, and whether or not that can make any difference. That's getting a drug combination that's getting a lot of attention right now. And so we'll look at that very rapidly in an observational and a randomized controlled trial. And also we're working a lot with the state who has been given many mathematical models by people inside the state and outside of the state, making projections about where things are likely to go in New York City and New York State. And we're working with the Commissioner of Taxation and the Department of Health to interpret those models, making sure they're parameterized correctly and interpreted correctly as much as possible. And the last thing that I would say is I always try and think in these updates of whether or not anything has changed in terms of advice that we as individuals can take. And the one thing I would just say is early on, there was a sense that if you were negative, that you wouldn't need to wear a mask. It's interesting that's starting to shift just a little bit, some of the advice. There's been a couple of studies that say maybe there's some benefit for that. We don't want to take masks away from healthcare providers or people who are living with COVID-19, but there's even CDC has started to talk about ways to kind of construct one's own mask, even out of cloth, that could be partially helpful. So that's a new area that I just wanted to mention, because I always want to make sure that if there's something out there that we think could be useful or protective, we talk about that. And that's an interesting area of discussion this week. So I'll stop there, and Bob, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, David. Appreciate that. Dr. Gallant, would you like to say a few words?
Sure, thank you. And it's really nice to be part of this tonight, so thank you for inviting me. So I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the School of Public Health, and Dean Holtgrave had asked me to just give a little update as to sort of from my perspective how things seem to be going at the School of Public Health and kind of what we've been observing both on sort of the faculty side and the student side. So we're now 1 week into this new, remote instruction world, and things seem to be going okay. I've heard from faculty that Zoom seems to be working well. Faculty are making really good use of Zoom, and I've heard positive reports about how classes are being conducted using Zoom, and so that seems to be working okay. I've been incredibly impressed how much everyone is sort of pitching in and stepping up to figure out how to get things accomplished in a new way, whether it's meetings or coursework or other activities. And I've really appreciated how much everyone has, sort of volunteered to do things when needs arise. In addition to, all the changes with courses that have been going on, some of the other things that we've been engaged in at the School of Public Health have to do with internships, like Provost Kim mentioned with the School of Social Welfare. Many of our School of Public Health MPH students are engaged in required internships this semester that are necessary for graduation. And we've been really fortunate that so many of our internship mentors have been able to figure out ways that internship work can continue remotely. And when that's not possible, our internship coordinator, Katrina Chamberlain, has been working one-on-one with students to ensure that alternative plans can be developed. So we've been able to handle that, which is a good thing. And then the other big event that happens at the School of Public Health in the spring is our poster day, where all of our mostly graduating students and many others present posters based on their either research work or internships. And those internship posters are a required part of our internship program. And so that's going to be a big change for us this spring in migrating poster day to a completely virtual environment. Not all the details have been worked out for that yet, but that poster day, I'm glad to say, will still occur, but we'll have to figure out how to do that virtually. So I think that'll work out just fine, and I'm looking forward to being able to have poster day with all of our students, because it's always a really special event, and it's good to know that we'll still be able to do that. We have a small number of students volunteering at the Schenectady County and Albany County health departments doing some volunteer work. And as we get any additional requests for students to help out at other county health departments or other organizations, we'll be putting out calls for students. So if you're looking for opportunities to volunteer, we haven't gotten a lot of requests yet. I think the counties are so busy just trying to do their day-to-day work, they haven't organized a lot of volunteer opportunities, but as those come up, we will put out calls for students. And lastly, I know Dean Holtgrave wanted me to just summarize a little bit sort of some of the concerns we've been hearing, and I wanted to highlight just a few sort of common concerns. First, as Provost Kim mentioned, we've also noticed students both on the graduate side and undergraduate who lack access to some technology, whether it's hardware or connectivity to engage in their coursework. And I would encourage students to reach out to the university. There's an email on the Keep Learning website for students. There's a link there where you can submit concerns about that. And I know that the university is really trying hard to address those challenges as best they can. We've also encouraged faculty to, as much as possible, try to make options in their courses so that students don't always have to log into Zoom at the same time. So if they can't log in when the course is going on, they can view a recorded lecture. The flip side of that is the feedback I've gotten from faculty is that sometimes that makes it a little bit difficult for faculty to sort of stay connected with students. And that's kind of a second concern I wanted to raise. I've been hearing from faculty that in this remote environment, they're having a harder time feeling engaged with their students. And so I want to encourage students especially to make sure to reach out to faculty if you have any concerns or questions, because it's not as easy in this remote environment as it is in the classroom for faculty to sort of stay connected with you. Another not surprisingly really common concern we've been hearing from a lot of students is our financial concerns. We have many students who have lost their jobs, whose families have lost their jobs, who are not sure how they're going to make ends meet, not sure how they're going to continue paying for school. As much as possible, I want to encourage students to, reach out to the financial aid office, to utilize the Purple Pantry at the university if that's can be of help to you. But that's one of the most common concerns that we've been hearing. We also have a subset of our graduate students, especially those who are in our online graduate program whose day jobs actually are in county health departments or healthcare organizations. And for those students, they have kind of a unique concern in that they're working, 10, 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week, and are having challenges, finding time to do their coursework for the semester. So we've really been encouraging students to let us know what concerns they have, and we've been encouraging faculty to be as flexible and as flexible as possible in terms of extensions or incompletes, just because we recognize those students are in a really tough position, and that their day jobs are really coming first at this point. And finally, I guess I just want to mention that, another concern I've been hearing across the board from students, from faculty, from, my own friends and family is just, the high level of stress that everyone is under in this time, whether it's because, students are at home in New York City, or they're worried about family in New York City, or because we're alone in our homes all day long. There's so many reasons right now that everyone's stress level is really high. And I just wanted to, in closing, sort of take the opportunity to remind people that even though we're, physically separated from a lot of people, that it's really important to find ways to stay, connected with others, whether it's, being able to get together on FaceTime for a social event. I think it's amazing that so many, I have some friends who are amateur musicians, and they're doing concerts on FaceTime. And I know others of you on the panel have been engaged in similar things. My book club met last week over FaceTime, and it was really nice to connect. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to encourage everyone to, remember that this is not normal times, and we need to find ways to make sure that we stay connected with our family and friends, and that helps add a little bit of normalcy back into these really unusual times. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dean Griffin.
Thanks, Dr. Gallant. Dr. Nussbaum, you're up.
Hello, everyone.
Nice sign in the background.
Thank you. I just wanted to take maybe 5 minutes and touch on a couple of issues around cybersecurity in this sort of new and unusual time period. And this comes in sort of 3 big buckets. So the first thing I want to talk about is some malicious cyber activity, either specifically related to COVID-19 or more generally related to the healthcare and public health sectors. I want to talk about some of the things that different countries are doing, particularly using mobile platforms, so apps and other things monitoring cell phones, and how these surveillance capabilities are being used for public health and quarantine, and things we might want to think about in terms of how they might be used moving forward. And then finally, I want to touch on some of the issues around working from home, remote learning, and some of the privacy and cyber concerns around those. So I'll start with that first bucket. The cybersecurity community has seen an absolute explosion of phishing campaigns of all varieties tied to COVID-19. Now, this is frankly not unusual. Every time there is any sort of disaster, there are usually phishing campaigns tied to it. So if it's an earthquake, suddenly there are phishing campaigns that focus on pretending to raise money for the victims, for example. This one is unusual because of how long it's lasting and the variety of phishing campaigns. So there are the traditional email phishing campaigns, but there have also been a number of other approaches here. So we've seen SMS phishing campaigns over text message. We've seen people setting up malicious websites that either attempt to collect money or do other sorts of things that would take advantage of people and get them to reveal information. And so I've included some links that I think Matt is going to distribute. And The links are to 2 documents. There are many more. One is from a company called Trend Micro. One is from the Australian federal government. But they both give examples and sort of a sense of the types of campaigns that we're seeing in an attempt to both steal credentials and steal money. Another issue of concern in the healthcare sector is ransomware. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, this is a type of malicious software or malware that gets on your computer and uses encryption to lock up your files and typically tries to extort a payment from you in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency in order to get your files back. We've seen really big problems with this in the healthcare sector. So the most famous example was the WannaCry infection and the impact it had on the British National Health Service. What's really, really interesting about the problems with ransomware in healthcare facilities is that COVID-19 has actually brought out some very interesting sort of thoughtful and helpful people from industry who have formed a task force to help hospitals deal with this problem. And then I don't know, it's even hard to explain, several of the largest ransomware groups have publicly spoken to journalists and acknowledged that they will not be targeting the healthcare sector during the outbreak, which is a very unusual sort of public messaging campaign from people who are, in their day-to-day jobs, criminals. It's an unusual one, but it's one that's worth keeping an eye on. And then finally, we have disinformation and bots from, elections to climate change to all sorts of other topics that people are interested in. Bots and other sort of social media disinformation campaigns have become kind of the norm. And so it's not unusual to think about those things in the COVID-19 context. But like so many other health issues, it's one where disinformation can be misleading in markets. It can be problematic in sort of people's day-to-day lives. When you start dealing with disinformation in public health situations, it really does escalate the consequence. It really does increase the danger of those. And so there have been a number of disinformation campaigns, some apparently tied to the behavior of particular nation states, but a lot of them don't appear to be necessarily geopolitically driven in the normal sense, certainly not in the way necessarily that election campaigns are, although there are some exceptions to that around different countries attempting to blame each other for the spread of COVID-19. Maybe the most interesting, and while it's gotten a little bit of media attention, it has not gotten nearly the attention it deserves, I think. Bucket here is the question of how different countries are using technology and technological surveillance capabilities to approach public health and quarantine in novel ways. So I have mentioned 3 countries here that have done unique things that are unusual, and I'll talk about what each of the 3 has done. But one of the things I think is really important is that lots of other countries are looking at these countries and others that are doing similar novel things to get ideas, but these ideas are not going to sort of dissipate when this pandemic does. And so I think there's some interesting implications we might want to think about. So in Israel, the domestic security agency, Shin Bet, has been using mobile phone surveillance capabilities that had historically been reserved for counterterrorism efforts. So it's not a direct parallel, but something similar in the US might be the kinds of things that you could only do under a unique FISA warrant, all right? Something that would be dedicated to sort of foreign counterintelligence or terrorism threats. And Israel has, according to press coverage, been using this kind of mobile surveillance capability that includes the location data that your phones broadcast. Even if you turn location services on your phone is still, in an attempt to contact cell towers, essentially broadcasting its location, right? And so the ability to surveil the location data of phones and cross-reference that with information about people who are potentially infected, as you can imagine, would be a very useful capability for thinking about public health surveillance as opposed to national security surveillance, but it's using the tools of national security surveillance. Poland has done something quite different. Poland has created a quarantine app. And if you are in quarantine, this app on your phone uses a combination of your location services and your ability to take pictures to send you texts requesting that you take a selfie of yourself in quarantine. As you know, oftentimes pictures are geolocated. And so this is the idea that the health authorities would text you. You would take a picture of yourself in bed at home. It would be geocoded with your location, and you would send it back to them within 15 or 20 minutes so that they would know that you are in fact maintaining your quarantine. If you didn't send it back in a certain amount of time, they would have the ability to dispatch public health authorities to come check on you and make sure you're not violating your quarantine. The third, and perhaps most interesting, is a model that's come out of Singapore. And in fact, so many other countries were looking at Singapore's model that Singapore has actually open sourced the software for its app and made it available. So it would not be surprising to me if other countries adopt something like it. Singapore's app is designed to do tracing. And so what it is a large number of people in a country of 6 million, which Singapore is, about 600,000 people have downloaded it. And it simply records you and your location, where you go. And then if someone who is using the app tests positive for COVID-19, the data that's collected from all these different apps is able to retroactively trace where those people have been and see which other app users may have come in contact with them. And so it essentially allows for, once you turn the app on, it collects data about your location and the data of everyone else using the app. It's sort of like Waze for walking around Singapore, right? But it allows you to retroactively go back and look at that data to do public health surveillance and tracing of potential exposures. Now, all three of these are different models of using mobile surveillance for public health purposes. All three of these have pretty interesting potential uses beyond public health. So for example, I imagine that after COVID-19 and the pandemic issues are in better shape, the Poland and Singapore models have the likelihood that they might be adopted for things like community corrections, which could in various ways be pretty creepy. But these models are very important for what they're doing at the moment and show some interesting innovation in using things we would normally think of as surveillance for public health surveillance. The third bucket I wanted to talk about was issues about work from home and remote learning and cybersecurity and passwords. I would say there are sort of three areas that are worth touching on. The first is, one of the things that's important is every new aspect of our life that we put online makes the basic blocking and tackling of cybersecurity that much more important. So in the same way that public health has these basic hygiene mechanisms like hand washing, right? Distancing. Cybersecurity has some very basic cyber hygiene issues. So the idea that you are using strong passwords and a variety of passwords, that you are not using the same username and password across 20 different online portals. Because the truth is, when hackers get one of them, they immediately just spray those usernames and passwords into every online portal they can, because most people don't mix up their passwords. The use of two-factor authentication, again, a very basic cybersecurity mechanism. One of the problems with cybersecurity is you're identifying yourself across the internet to a computer. There are only three ways to identify yourself or authenticate to a computer: something you are, which is biometrics; something you have, which is something like a key or a token or a phone; and something you know, like a password, right? Any one of those is easy to spoof, but spoofing multiple versions of authentication is actually quite hard. It's not impossible, but it makes it a much tougher problem for the attackers. So any basic portal you're using, any email functionality, you want to include two-factor authentication, because the truth is getting that SMS code and entering it once, because the device is a private rather than public device, only takes a couple of minutes, but it really does make it much harder for somebody to break into your system. And one of the lessons from all the data breaches we've seen, prior to my work at the university, I used to work in government. And so at one point I had a security clearance. And so I was one of the many victims, along with some other folks here, of the OPM breach. And all the information that was collected about my background investigation is now sitting on a server somewhere in, I think, Beijing, but I'm not sure exactly. I've heard that in the news. But the truth is, all of that information was designed to be private. But the truth is, when you put private information into electronic systems, there's just a much higher likelihood that that data will cease to be private at some point. If you look at the attack on Sony Pictures, the cyber attack in which all of their email was leaked, everybody assumed that their email was private. But when it was made public, that assumption sort of went away. And the problem is that stealing data in the pre-computer era was tough to do at scale. So the OPM breach, had it happened in the 1940s, would have involved backing a truck up to a building and unloading file cabinets for 3 days. But electronically, you can breach data, including big groups of data like an entire company's email history, in a short period of time. And so one of the lessons we always try and teach our students in the cyber hygiene world is, don't put something in an email that would destroy your life if it became public, right? And these sort of basic rules about thinking of electronic storage systems not as magic boxes that forever secure your information, but essentially as electronic filing cabinets that often have kind of quirky and breakable locks, is a useful way to think about it. In terms of synchronous teleconferencing, lots of folks are using lots of different models today. So Zoom is what we're using tonight, Skype, Teams, Hangouts. There are more of these types of products that I can count. About them, I would make 2 points. The first one is the same point about email. I don't or wouldn't want to say anything in a synchronous teleconference that I wouldn't want to say publicly. And that is because it's very tough to know for sure who's watching, who's recording. So all of these tools have internal recording features, but the truth is, even if the internal recording features are turned off, that doesn't stop people from recording at the endpoint. So if I have on my desktop a video recording software, I can record my desktop regardless of what's on it. There are lots and lots of tools, that have tried to make data that is sort of perishable and goes away quickly. And the truth is, what we see from security study after security study is that even the ones that are relatively good at making data go away quickly often leave lots of metadata and other information that you can use to try and figure out what was going on there. The second thing I would say about the teleconferencing software is, we have to remember that education is not the teleconferencing software's first usage. One of the things that's really, really important to think about is, if I'm Zoom or I'm Skype or I'm Google or whoever else, Microsoft, who do I sell this product to? And the truth is, while universities and students certainly get licenses, the vast bulk of the sales of this product or these products are to companies. And it's to companies that are conducting teleconferences with their own employees, right? And so, for example, there are lots of situations in which a company might want to be able to monitor what its employees are doing. So a lot of these tools will have in them the capability to monitor the other people using it, because in its general applicable business model, that's what the company is purchasing from the software provider. So it's just important to think about these things in the context in which they're typically created and marketed, which is as corporate teleconferencing tools. And then finally, in the educational and e-learning platforms, we're very lucky in higher education in general and at UAlbany in particular. So we have like a really remarkable information security team as part of our ITS folks. We've had the good fortune at CEHC to work with them for a long time, and they do a great job. All of you will remember the campaigns of DDoS attacks that we were having. The thing I would point to in general is that particularly K through 12 education is actually much worse off. They take whatever shiny new product comes out, and because they're resource constrained, they almost always get the cheapest version of it. And so we're lucky in the sense that at the university, we really do have information security professionals looking at the things that we're doing and the tools we're adopting. It's important to recognize that a lot of our colleagues, either in higher education at smaller scale, at smaller universities that don't have that same resource, or in the K through 12 level, they really are adopting tools, often without looking at the security and privacy concerns around them. And so it's just something to be aware of, that amongst people who are cybersecurity practitioners, education is known as an area in which buggy and vulnerable stuff gets adopted very often. And
great. Hey, Brian, I think I'm gonna try to break in and get to some of the questions. So go ahead and finish up that thought, okay?
Yep, absolutely. I was just gonna say, to close up, the final point I would make is I have a good friend who runs a company, penetration testing company, and they break into other companies' security. And they say that the two places it's easiest are in healthcare and higher ed. And I think it's because there are professors and doctors who both don't like to take cybersecurity advice from their IT people. We have the good fortune of having great IT people, and so we should take their advice when they give it to us.
Thank you so much. So in the background, while our panelists were talking, we had a number of faculty from School of Public Health and from the CEHC answering questions, but we still have some more questions that are queued up. Jen Goodall, why don't you take it and start feeding the questions to the panel?
Sure. So the first question we have is, given the fact that the US has not tested per 1,000 people at nearly the same rate as other nations, is there modeling out there for how many people in the country actually have the virus?
Here we go. So this is David. I can maybe start by trying to answer that. So one way to think about that is there's lots of different models that give big different ranges about this, and I'll give just two kind of examples of ways to think about this. One that's more data driven and is very much an underestimate. If you think about New York City, so right now as of today, there's about 9,517 people living with COVID that are hospitalized in New York State, I should say, not just the city, but in New York State. And we know that means that about 14% of people who have this novel virus have come to be hospitalized. So there's about a 14% hospitalization rate. So one way you can think about this is, say, take for New York City, the number of cases that we've got there so far, and think about multiplying that by the inverse of the hospitalization rate. And it gives you, and the reason why that might be a legitimate thing to do is in order to get a test right now, you really need to be in the New York City area, a healthcare worker or somebody who's symptomatic and hospitalized. So if you take 1 divided by 0.143, That's about 7. And if you multiply the number of cases in the city, would give you a sense of kind of the rough order of magnitude about the number of cases that might be there. That's one estimate you could take. You could also apply the same idea looking at this IHME model. And the IHME model that I talked about earlier suggested that between now and the 1st of August, there would be about 81,000 deaths in the United States. If the fatality rate in the US is about 0.175, so just about 1 3/4%, if you take the inverse of that and multiply it by the number of deaths from that model, gives you a sense that by August, we could be looking at a little over 4 million cases in the US. So if you believe that estimate of deaths from that one model, and if you believe a fatality rate of about 1 3/4%, it would lead you to an estimate of about that. So on the Sunday morning talk shows this week, Dr. Fauci was saying that he thought there might be 100 to 200,000 deaths in the United States and in the millions of cases. And I think that's why that kind of statement gives you some broad ranges, but it comes from this kind of calculation that's being made. So those are a couple of thoughts about that question.
And David, are we seeing similar numbers in Spain and Germany? I know it's sort of, those numbers do match what we're seeing in Italy, but how about the other countries?
Yeah, so Spain and Germany are really moving very rapidly as well, too. And there's one in my Twitter feed, I always retweet this once a day. Somebody does a great graph that looks at whether or not deaths and cases are doubling every day or 2 days or 3 days and so on. And you get a sort of sense by country how much the speed is moving. So right now, the US is much more in the company of France, Spain, Germany, Italy, and I was hopeful that we might more be turning toward the area of Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, but it looks like we're drifting more in the direction of some of those countries from the European Union, probably.
Okay, great, thank you. Jen, next question.
Sure. Dean Holtgrave, you mentioned the University of Washington model that the White House Task Force, Dr. Birx, and CDC are using. Would you have an opinion what makes it more reliable than other existing models from reputable sources like Johns Hopkins, et cetera?
Thanks. It's a great question. And I would say it's not a matter of if it's a better or worse model. There's actually many out there. There's literally dozens at this point, and people are having like virtual conferences of just the people who are doing mathematical modeling about the global situation, the US and New York State and others. All of these models, of course, have some pros and cons to them. I think one of the reasons why the IHME model from Washington has caught on potentially with the White House Task Force is I would describe it as 2 very big classes of models, one of which takes what we know about kind of the dynamics of epidemics, feeds some input data, and then looks at what the prediction might be of where we're going. And examples of those might be like the Imperial College model that we've heard a lot about in the press, that early on predicted without intervention, the US would have 2.2 million deaths from coronavirus. A different kind of model, of which the IHME model is an example, is it waits a little bit longer before making estimates, and it starts to look at observed data points and then does curve fitting to those data points to see how we might extrapolate from those curves. And so really the driver in this IME model is what's being observed in each of the states in the US and the country overall. What's being observed in terms of deaths. And given what we see by state and in this country about the shape of that curve of deaths by day, then making extrapolations from that of what must be the case. And I think that Dr. Birx on the White House Task Force has talked about looking at data, looking at curves, looking at things that they already know, and then seeing how you might extrapolate from that. So I think that model is probably being used because it's one of that class of kind of curve fitting models based on some things that we know. But all the models are useful, and I was always taught that it's useful to have multiple models that you can triangulate and see if you learned common lessons from a variety of different methods.
Thank you for that, Dean Holtgrave. Jen, next question.
Sure. What are some best practices when it comes to securing home offices? How do I communicate these practices to others, family, friends, and community?
Dr. Nussbaum, do you want to take that?
So by securing home offices, I assume it means securing the ability to work from home. So again, in the UAlbany context, we're in pretty good shape. We have VPN access to the university resources that we need, for example. I mean, in this case, I do think a lot of it comes down to the basic cyber hygiene, blocking and tackling. So using different and not easy to guess passwords. So I suggest everyone who's never done this, just go to Google Images and type in top 50 passwords or top 20, and you'll see graphs that show you that in most breaches, 40, 50, sometimes 70% of people are using one of the top 20 passwords, right? Don't use fall 2020. That's a bad password. And a lot of people don't want to manage the problem of having multiple complex passwords, but there are ways around that. You can use a password manager. The truth is, if you're working from home, making it a physical security problem rather than a cybersecurity problem is often a good risk management move. Having a list in your locked desk drawer of your passwords is not the end of the world. Don't post them on Post-it notes on your computer at work. That's very bad practice. But if somebody has to break into your desk in your home office to get your passwords are in pretty safe hands compared to using, Lucky 27, right? So I do think a lot of the work from home mechanisms really are questions of doing the basic IT security stuff right.
Great. And if I could add on to that, absolutely check your passwords, but also check to make sure that your connected devices are password connected. So look at what's connected through your Bluetooth. Look what's connected to your systems. For instance, an easy access into people's home system are through things like printers. It's in things like the smart devices, whether it's refrigerators or washing machines. In fact, when I was still at Homeland Security, we had a case where the Pentagon had an attack, and it was vectored through a hot pot. So if you think about a wireless hot pot, so take a look at the devices that are showing on your phone, and make sure that you have password protection on all of those devices. Because it is an easy way for people to access your home and family. In fact, it is an advertisement on Thursday at 5 o'clock. Dr. Benjamin Yankson is going to be giving the first faculty talk on IoT cybersecurity, and among the different parts of his discussion will be things like Internet of Things toys. And if you want to be kind of creeped out about the lack of security in your home or the home of your family, listen in on Thursday with a close ear. So that's Thursday at 5 o'clock. Jen, next question.
Sure. The next question, Dr. Kim, what is the latest thinking on commencement? Is rescheduling an in-person event a realistic possibility given the uncertain future in front of us?
So that's a great question. I know on the minds of many of our students, in particular the seniors on our campus. And just to let you know, this was an incredibly difficult decision to make for the executive council and for the president. And so, you know, he did not, or we did not decide to postpone commencement. We did not make that decision lightly at all. So, and I do feel for all of the students who were looking forward to the May commencement, and now that is postponed. In terms of the likelihood that it will be a rescheduled in-person event, we are really trying hard to make something like that happen, but we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know really when we'll be back on campus. Hopefully sometime during the summer, but who knows, right? So I don't think that anyone, and Dr. Holtgrave can jump in here, I don't think that anyone knows exactly when we'll all be together and could have a big event like this. So health and safety first. I think that was the main reason why we had to postpone commencement, and that will continue to be the primary guideline for when we would reschedule.
David, do you want to make any comments about that?
Just to agree with Provost Kim, and just also to say that I think one of the lessons we learned from the models is that the more we do things right now with regard to physical distancing, and the more complete we do that, and the better we are at doing that, the more we can move to a sense of normalcy on the other side sooner. It's hard to know exactly when that would be. And also, the more we do that in a conscientious way, the more we can help avoid sort of big second waves as well too farther down the road. So I think all of us have a really important role to play in terms of physical distancing or social distancing, and moving forward in testing and a number of the other areas that we've been talking about. And all of that is going to help keep down the chance of a second wave farther down the road, and help move more quickly our opportunities to get back to a sense of normal function on campus.
Thanks. If I could jump in, I mean, I can tell you that both the president and the provost agonized over the decision. Commencement isn't only important to the graduates and their family, but it's incredibly important to the faculty and the staff and the entire university community. It's truly a celebration of why we exist, and it rejuvenates us and lends importance to what we do. So any opportunity that we can have to do face to face, we don't know what the future is going to lead, but any opportunity is something that we'll jump at, because it's part of who we are as an academic institution. So it's an incredibly difficult decision to make. Dr. Goodall, another question?
Sure. Is there a possibility of SUNY Albany being converted into an improvised medical center?
I'll go out on a limb and start, and Dr. Holtgrave, you can jump in. At this time, I don't see that as an option. I'm looking at what's occurring down at the city in different options. I think that, again, not knowing what the future holds, if you see a mass outbreak and things get considerably worse in this region, then all bets are off the table. But at this point in time, my sense is, as an emergency manager, is that it's not on the top priority of the state officials. David, do you want to jump in?
May I just say a word, and Provost Kim may want to comment on this as well too. I agree with you, Bob. I haven't heard that about UAlbany. I would just say that as a system-wide, the SUNY system, I think, has really tried hard, every campus doing what it does best as a way to contribute to addressing this pandemic. And just one example is, for instance, SUNY Downstate, the medical facilities there are now going to be one of 3 hospitals in the state of New York where all the patients in the hospital will be COVID-19 patients. And that will allow for healthcare workers to know that everyone is living with this virus. They can specialize their care better. They can really come together and provide outstanding care for COVID-19 patients. And then at the same time, patients who are not living with this virus can be receiving care in other facilities. And it really is a way to try and streamline the care. And it's interesting, it picks up on an idea in China where people were asked to go to either hospitals if you had a fever and other hospitals if you didn't have a fever, as a way to help triage up front. So I just wanted to say that because I think the SUNY system is really trying very hard campus by campus to make whatever unique contributions that it can. But Provost Kim, anything you wanted to add?
Yes, so there are no plans right now for UAlbany to become one of these hospitals, but there are a number of the campuses in and around the New York City area that that are part of the SUNY system and CUNY system that are being used as hospitals. So Stony Brook being one of them. We're not, using their facilities for these purposes. But again, UAlbany, it's not planned right now.
Yeah, and for folks that they're studying emergency management and preparedness, you got to remember part of the challenge is that life still goes on. So babies need to be born, and people have heart attacks, and people have strokes, and in a world where our hospitals were already busy to begin with, we can take some weight off our hospitals by not doing elective surgery, but you still have enough other burden that you've got to be able to plan for. And it's that idea of, as a planner, of thinking, how do you deal with all of these multiple problems while still focusing on this big new problem that you need to deal with? Jennifer, Dr. Goodall, we have one final question. I know we're a couple minutes over, so why don't we finish this one up? And before you start, I just need to thank all of the faculty who have been answering questions behind the scenes. There have been a whole host of questions that the faculty have been answering from both public health and CEHC. So thank you to all of the faculty and staff who are making this possible. Final question, Dr. Goodall?
Sure. Last question. Professor Nussbaum, due to COVID-19, has there been a drastic increase in threats to critical infrastructure across the U.S.?
I don't think there's been a drastic increase, but it is worth noting that critical infrastructure sectors like water systems, electrical grid, they've been doing really, really good pandemic planning for quite some time. And that's important because both the computerization of those infrastructure systems has shrunk the size of their workforce, but also there have been a number of other trends in industry that have actually led to them having an aging workforce as well. A lot of these, particularly smaller local water facilities, might only have 6 or 8 staff, and oftentimes the average age is in the 50s maybe. And so it's just worth noting, while there hasn't been a huge spike in threats to critical infrastructure sectors have been planning for pandemic stuff for quite some time. And now those plans are actually turning out to be very useful because they are sectors that we rely on and that are at risk.
And for the Homeland Security students, this is where you start to see the interagency coordination occurring. While there isn't any set threats, what you'll start to see is a lean forward from our intelligence communities. So the 3-letter agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the Office of National Intelligence, they're going to be watching really carefully to make sure that nobody thinks that they can take advantage of the situation that's occurring in the United States. You'll also start to see additional support and security at not only our military bases, but also some of our other secure facilities, particularly that are run by the Department of Energy, that deal with our radiological or nuclear stockpiles as well. So behind the scenes, you will see a marked increase in the pace tempo of the intelligence community watching what is occurring. With that said, I am out of time, but before I make a last comment, Provost Kim, would you like to make any sign off?
Just to thank everyone on the panel. Thank you, Bob, for your great emceeing here and organizing everyone, and Jen Goodall also for the great question prompting. I just wanted to really emphasize to all of the students out there that even though it's not business as usual, many of the operations on the campus are open and functional, but remotely. So please check the COVID-19 website. check the student information. There's also a faculty staff information site with lots of facts and information there for you. It's a great resource. But just to remind you, the library services are open, advising, health services, including CAPS, financial aid, most of the administrative offices. And so swinging back to advising, including tutoring and career services, all of those are open. So, but you need to just email somebody, or you can call, you can go to their websites.
Thank you very much. Final statement. Thank you to all the panel members, Provost, Dean Holtgrave, Dr. Gallant, Dr. Nussbaum, and on behalf of President Rodriguez, thank you very much, everybody. Be safe and continue to stay connected with us. Your UAlbany family is worried and thinking about you, and we're here for you. Everybody have a great evening. Thank you.